I want to wish you a happy Resurrection Day. Good to see you. Great to have you here, all of you who are in this room, and we have 2 more overflow rooms, and they are full, and we welcome you. Pastor Jason already got you started this morning. Let's try it again. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Now, I want to get us started with a couple of questions, and here's the first one I have for you. How many of you love a great comeback story or a great comeback movie? Let me see your hand. You love a great comeback story, great comeback movie? Okay, how many of you are Rocky Balboa fans? You love Rocky movies? Come on, didn't you love Rocky 15? It's like Rocky is in his mid-80s. He's living in that retirement center, and he signs up for one more match, but he can't find his gloves. So anyway, but it's a great movie. I got a second question for you. How many of you want a great comeback story of your own? How many need one of those? How many want a great comeback story in your life? Well, listen, if you raise your hand for either or both of those questions, this is your Sunday. Because Easter is the ultimate comeback. But more than that, Easter is the key to our coming back, to the comebacks God has for us. In fact, this weekend we start a brand new series. It's going to kick off this week, and we're going to continue it for the next several weeks, and it's simply titled Comebacks. And for several weekends, we're going to talk about how you and I can come back from some of the most difficult and debilitating and even painful setbacks in our life. And we've all had those. In fact, you can come back, and I want to tell you why. You can come back because of Easter. Now, when I say Easter, let me define my term for a moment. I'm not talking about the holiday. I'm talking about the holy day. I'm not talking about eggs and all the fun stuff that sometimes is around this day. I'm talking about the realities of Easter. That Jesus suffered and died, was crucified, and rose again. That's what I mean when I say Easter. It's all that happened on Easter. And it's because of Easter that you and I can come back from anything, anytime. And I want to share with you just for a couple of moments today, I want to share with you 3 comeback principles that we find and are taught to us in the Easter story, in the ultimate comeback story. So if you're new to Bonita Valley, we welcome you. And if you got a program, inside that program, there's a page. It's a note page. And we like to write things down because when we write, it helps us to see it because I'm a visual learner and remember it. So there are 3 things I want you to write down. We're going to get started. In your notes, here's the first thing I want you to see. Easter shows us that God is the initiator of our comebacks. The word I want you to write is initiator. The first principle of coming back is knowing that God initiates every comeback story. In fact, God began to write your comeback story before you were born. God wrote my comeback story before I was even created, before anything was created. John writes this in the book of Revelation. Watch. Revelation 13, verse 8. He says, the lamb was sacrificed before, say it out loud, creation of the world. Now, hold on a second. John is saying that Easter was planned before anything else even came into being. Before God created anything, he had a plan. Why? Because God knew us. And he knew we were going to blow it. That we were going to mess up. Okay, real quick confessional because you're in church. Anyone who's ever blown it at least once, raise your hand. And if you didn't raise your hand, there's your first time. Okay, we've all blown it. Yeah, right. We've all messed up in many ways, Scripture says. And God understood what he was risking when he gave us free will. He knew what he was risking when he gave us the keys to making choices, that we might not always choose the best or the right or his ways. He knew us before he even made us, and we did blow it. Adam and Eve blew it, not just them, we all have. And God understood what it was going to do, how it was going to break them. He understood how it was going to cost them in ways they couldn't even fathom. More than that, God understood how it was going to break his heart to see what happened to us and how it was going to cost him because of what happened to us. But he made us anyway. God says, I know what you're going to do with your free will and choice. I know how you're going to break your heart and mine and how it's going to cost you and me, but you are worth it to me. Because I want a family, and I want you to be part of my family. And so before God even made us, he made us with a comeback plan. Before the foundations of the world were put in place, Jesus had already offered himself as the ultimate sacrifice for us. And from the very first book of the Bible, the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis, God starts to reveal this plan. Please know that Easter didn't just come up. Easter isn't relatively new. It is eternally old, the plan of God. Watch this. In Genesis 3, verse 15, after Adam and Eve have sinned, and God is speaking to them, and he speaks to Satan, the serpent, and says, I will make you and the woman enemies to each other. One of her descendants will crush your head, and you will bite his heel. God is talking about Jesus. The seed of the woman, a very unusual phrase, is used because this child is going to be very unusual, fully God, fully man, without sin, so he can be the ultimate sacrifice for sin. And he is going to crush Satan's head. Jesus said, I came to destroy the works of the devil so that you and I might be liberated for a comeback. When Abraham got this promise of God, and God said, I'm going to bless you and your seed, and I'm going to bless everyone through you. And he was given this amazing promise. And then God says, now I want you to take that promise and sacrifice it on the mountain to me. Take the son, your only son, the son you love, like if that wasn't bad, and take him and offer him as a sacrifice. And so Abraham believed God, and he takes his son Isaac, and they're walking up the mountain, and Isaac says, okay, Dad, we got the wood. Where's the animal? And Abraham says, God will provide. And when he got to the mountain, he ties his son up. And he's about to offer his son back to God, and God stops him and says, I know that you trust me more than that you want me, love me more than the promise itself. Don't take your son's life. And then there was this animal caught in a thicket, this ram, and Abraham takes that and he sacrifices it. But listen carefully, what God stopped Abraham from doing, God himself did to his son, his only son, the son whom he loved. Moses, leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, has this Passover experience in which he tells them, take a lamb and bring it into your house for 3 days and watch it, make sure it is perfect. And then sacrifice that lamb and take the blood and put it on the top of your door and on both sides. It looks just like a cross, and the angel of death will pass over. It was all a picture of a plan. So you got to understand something. Jesus on the cross was not initiated by the Romans. It wasn't initiated by the Jews. It was initiated by God. In fact, Peter comes to understand that. The disciples, they didn't see that at first. And here's what Peter preaches on the day of Pentecost. Watch, Acts 2, verse 22. People of Israel, listen, he says. God publicly endorsed Jesus, the Nazarene, by doing powerful miracles, wonders, and signs through him, as you well know. But God knew what would happen, and his prearranged what? Plan was carried out when Jesus was betrayed. With the help of lawless Gentiles, you nailed him to a cross and killed him, but God released him from the horrors of death and raised him back to life, for death could not keep him in its grip. Easter was pre-planned by God as the ultimate comeback plan for you and me. So please understand once again, there is no one more for you than God. Because sometimes we go, where are you? And why could you let this happen to me? There is no one who wants to see you come back to the purpose and plan for your life more than the God who created you and that purpose and plan for your life. That's the first thing you've got to understand about comebacks, that God initiates them. But here's a second principle we learn in the Easter story. I want you to write in your notes. Easter shows us there is a godly process and timing to our comebacks. There's two words I want you to write down. I want you to write the word process and timing. Jesus shows us both of those things when he describes the comeback plans of God. Watch this, John 12, verse 23. Jesus says, now the time has come for the Son of Man to enter his glory, what he came to do, what he came to be. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. Jesus is saying something incredibly important here about the ultimate plan of God. He tells us, first of all, that there's a timing for it. He says, now the time has come. That's a really interesting statement because in John's gospel, several times, Jesus says, now's not the right time. Now's not the right time. How many of you have figured out that timing is a really important part of success? Have you ever done the right thing at the wrong time and it blew up? Okay, how many of you have ever proposed and it wasn't the right way? Anyway, so there's right times and wrong times for succeeding. And in John's gospel, it was in John chapter 2 that Jesus is just beginning his public ministry. And he's invited to a wedding and he brings his gang with him and his mom is there. And his mom finds out Mary, there's a wedding catering crisis. And so she tells Jesus they're out of wine. Can you bail this couple out? And he's like, Mom, this is not my time. That's what he said, not my hour. He wasn't saying it's not time to do a miracle. He's saying it's not my fulfillment time of my plan, of God's plan for my life. So he does the miracle, but it wasn't the time yet. It wasn't the fulfillment time yet. A few chapters later, John chapter 7, his brothers, his immediate family say to him, Jesus, if you are who you really say you are, you got to get out of this Galilee area. This is kind of the boonies, and you got to go to Jerusalem because that's the big city and that's the big stage. And if you are who you say you are and you are the Messiah that's going to free us from Rome, you got to go to Jerusalem. And then Jesus says something really interesting to his brothers. He says, for you, the time is always right, but it's not the right time for me. Now, he does go later, but he doesn't go like in this very public way. He kind of slips into the city. He does have that public moment, remember, on what we call Palm Sunday, when he rode into the city, because there did come a moment, and it was the time, listen carefully, God not only has a perfect comeback plan for us, he has a perfect time for that plan for us. God is never early, and God is never late. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes God's schedule and mine are not on the same page, okay? How many of you have ever been in a hurry and God wasn't? Anybody other than me? Okay, like, God, I know you're eternal, but I need this before I die, okay? Like let's hustle this up a little bit. But the Bible says that timing is always in God's hands. It's his part. And that trusting is in our hands. It's our part. And that I've got to trust God not only for the plan he has, but for the timing he has, because there's a right time for the right plan of God. And that's the process. Jesus not only says now is the right time, he then goes into this kind of word picture about a seed or a kernel of wheat. And unless it goes into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. And he's giving us a very important teaching about how God works in our life. And listen carefully. God works in our life in processes or in stages. And Jesus uses an agricultural picture because it helps us see how things happen in agriculture, and it's how God works in our life. Let me explain it like this. There is a birth stage to God's visions and dreams and comeback plans for us. That birth stage is the seed. It's what God has for us. And we have this vision in our heart, this picture of the future of what could be, and it ignites passion in us. That's a vision. That's the seed. That's the birth. I got this sense. I got this feeling. This is what God wants for me. Okay, that's the seed stage. That's the birth stage. But there's a second stage in agriculture. You have the seed that has the potential and the purpose, but to experience it, you got to bury it. You gotta release it. And so when it's released, if you don't release the seed, there comes that moment that you gotta let it go. If you don't let it go, it will never become what it was meant to be. You'll have a seed, but you'll never have a harvest. And then the third part is when you let the seed go, something happens in the ground. It is dead, it is gone. But when you release it, something happens that would not happen had you not released it. And that seed begins to realize its purpose, and it begins to grow, and it begins to produce. And Jesus says that is exactly what the process of God is in my life. Jesus was born, the seed of what he was to be. He offered himself in Gethsemane. He surrendered. God, not my will, but your will. That's one of the greatest battles we'll ever face is, God, I want to release the promise. I can't make it happen. I can't control it, so I release it. And that sets up the third stage. Now, I want to ask you a question. This is not a trick question, okay? Because like the last service thought I was tricking them. I'm not, okay? This is not a trick question. So you can answer out loud, because you know the answer. You can answer out loud, and you're not going to be wrong, all right? I promise you. Here's the question. When Jesus died, where did they bury him? A tomb, okay? Well, you're half right. But John says, listen, that they buried him in a garden tomb. If you want to get rid of a seed, don't plant it in a garden. Jesus, the seed of the promise and purpose of God, not only surrendered himself, he was planted in a garden tomb, and he came back. But that's not only his process. He tells us that same process for me is God's process for you. Watch, here's the next thing he says, John 12, verse 25. In the same way, Jesus says, anyone who holds on to life just as it is destroys that life. But if you let it go, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. Jesus said, what I did, you have to do. There'll come a moment in your life in which God will not only give you the seed of a promise and a purpose and a comeback, there'll come a moment in which you have to surrender your control of it. And you got to let it go and, as it were, watch it die. But if you'll let it die, something will happen to it. Now, I want to give you a visual. I want to show you what that comeback process looks like in our lives, so just watch the screens.
It was this really exciting moment in my life. We were getting this new job, this new church family, new city. I was so excited to work for Pastor Jeff. Man, his vision for what he was doing in Bonita, I was like, man, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to do. And so we're getting ready to move to this new city. We're getting ready to be part of this new church family. But while this is happening, as I get the new job, my tongue is like swelling. There's this thing on my tongue. Like it was affecting my speech. It was affecting me being able to eat. And I was like, man, so then I did the worst thing you can do. I Googled it. And that scared me because everything said, oh, you have cancer and you're going to die. And so I go in, they do a biopsy, and that's when I find out, 2 weeks into this new job, this new season of life, you have cancer.
In my mind, I was just thinking it was like, maybe skin cancer, like you just take off the top layer and everything's going to be okay. But then the doctor quickly communicated to us that it was not like skin cancer at all, and that and they didn't know how deep it was into his tongue.
And my first response was, that's not my story. I have friends, and that's their story. I have family members, and that was their story. This is not how my story goes. So I ignored it, and I went back to my job, and that's when my body like shuts down. All of a sudden, my hip, it feels like my hip is broken. It's in so much pain. The next morning, I'm trying to take a shower, and as I get out of the shower, my body just collapsed to the ground, and I'm shaking on the ground, and I just start screaming. And my wife runs over to see what's wrong, and my body's just convulsing. I don't know how to explain it.
And he was just screaming out in pain. I've never seen him, in that much pain before. So we called an ambulance, and an ambulance medically transported him to the emergency room.
Doctors discovered that the stage 3 cancer in Jason's tongue was secreting a chemical that was literally poisoning him from the inside out. His 13-day hospital stay included a trip to the operating room.
So they drill a hole in my hip. Now I'm in a wheelchair with cancer in my mouth. So then they do the first surgery, and they open me up from ear to ear, and they begin to remove half of my lymph nodes, and they remove 20% of my tongue, believing that they'll get all the cancer out.
Recovery was difficult and painful, but after 4 months, Jason was excited and ready to get on with his life and ministry.
That was a weird rabbit trail in my story, but it's behind me. It's over. Now I'm going to that promised land. I'm going to be the pastor God called me to be. I'm going to partner with Pastor Jeff in Bonita Valley. Let's do this. That's over. I don't know what that was, but I'm going for it. All of a sudden, at the end of June, my tongue, that same thing is on my tongue. I remember the doctor, he looks at it and he says, I don't know what to tell you, but the cancer came back. It came back more aggressive. It's spreading quicker. It's already spread to your neck. It didn't spread this fast last time. This is borderline stage 4 cancer. We have to operate.
At that point, I just felt like I was sinking. I felt like I couldn't breathe.
We're gonna remove most of your tongue. I'm like, no, you already took 20%. I don't have any more tongue to give you. He's like, now we're gonna have to open up your neck again. And I'm like, no, not more staples, not more tubes coming out of my neck. I'm like, no, I can't do that again. I can't go through that again. And he's like, we're gonna remove all the lymph nodes in your neck. But then here's what we're gonna have to do. I'm like, more? Yeah, he says, your arm, to reconstruct your tongue, we're going to take a chunk of your arm, we're gonna form a tongue in your mouth. Oh, and your leg, we're gonna have to take the skin from your leg, we're gonna put that on your arm. I'm like, what?
So when the doctor was talking, I was starting to black out. And so I remember gathering enough energy to tell the doctor and tell Jason, I said, I'll be right back. And then I got right outside, and then I fell right outside the doctor's office because I didn't know how to process that.
I remember him explaining everything. He's like, you're not gonna be able to use your arm for a while. Now I'm a piano player. So it's like, you're not gonna be able to use your arm for a while. I'm a singer and a speaker, and he says, you're not gonna talk the same. You're not gonna be able to talk like you used to talk. We don't even know if you'll be able to sing again. And I remember sitting there where he kept talking, and I literally stopped listening, and I just started crying. I felt so unprofessional. I didn't feel like an adult, like a man in that moment, because I'm just sitting in the chair weeping as the doctor is just telling me what's gonna happen. And I'm like, I can't do this.
But there was no choice. Jason underwent a grueling 15-hour surgery. Afterwards,
he looked just like he had gotten out of a warfare, like he just was all bandaged up and everything, and he looked like he was, he had taken a pretty hard hit.
but as bad as he looked, he felt even worse.
I'm feeling like I need to throw up, but I can't throw up because my tongue is so swollen. It's so swollen that I can't breathe out of my mouth. So they put a trach, they put a tube in my neck so I can breathe out of my neck. But my body is, rejecting the tube, and so it keeps forming all of this mucus. And I feel like I'm gonna throw up, and I can't get air. And so I would start panicking, my heart rate would jump up, the doctors would run in, and they would take a little vacuum, and they'd put it down my throat to vacuum the mucus, and they would have to do this every 3 to 5 minutes. It was so much stress and panic and pain, and because of that, I couldn't sleep. So 3 days go by, 3 days where I haven't slept. The pain was so bad that they were trying to give me pain medicine, but pain medicine stops you from being able to use the bathroom. And so to compensate, they would then give me lots of Senna, stuff that would help me go. So there's this horrific moment, and I will never forget. I'm laying in the bathroom. I'm laying on the ground, covered in my own waste. And I'm throwing up. I've got mucus pouring out of my neck, blood coming out of my mouth, and I am screaming in pain. I remember in that moment thinking, I can't do this anymore. All I know is simple math. The pain is too much. The only way to end the pain is to die. I remember typing it in Google, easy ways to die. Easy ways to die, because I'm tired of the pain. So if I'm gonna kill myself, I don't want it to hurt. Because I can't, I'm tired of people poking me. I'm tired of being poked in my arm and in my face. I'm tired of them ripping out stitches. So if I'm gonna kill myself, it can't hurt.
I came into the hospital, and I knew he was just in a persistent pain. Usually he can say hi, or usually he can smile, but he couldn't do any of those things.
She can tell I'm not okay, and I can't sleep, and I tell her, I just want to sleep. Sleep is the only thing that might make me forget about the pain, because I can't figure out how to kill myself without hurting myself. So she prays over me, and she begins to do something that she rarely ever does. She begins to sing. She begins to sing over me.
I was fighting the worry, I was fighting the anxiety, I was fighting the fear that the doctors weren't going to be right again. But I just kept on choosing to just worship God and knowing that everything was going to be okay.
And all of a sudden in that moment, I just felt like a presence just enter the room. And it was like if peace was a person, he entered that room in that moment, and I just began to drift off to sleep for the first time in 3 days. I think I slept for like 12 hours. I woke up the next day and I started telling myself I'm not going to give up. That's the only thing. I don't know why I'm not going to give up, but I'm just not going to.
That determination was barely enough to carry Jason through 35 rounds of radiation and 8 weeks of chemotherapy. He could hardly walk, and he was only fed through a tube. Along the way, he lost 80 pounds. As miserable as his present was, he was afraid his future might be worse.
I remember I told Pastor Jeff, like, my best years are behind me. And he looked at me and he said, I don't believe that. You know, he spoke hope into me. He said, I believe the best is yet to come. And I honestly, I was thankful he said that, but I didn't believe him. I'll never be who I was. I'll never get to sing again. I'll never get to make music again. I might never get to preach again. But then, it was April, it was Easter Sunday, 2017. Pastor Jeff comes to my house and he says, hey, do you feel well enough that I could bring you up on stage on Easter Sunday? The church wants to see how you're doing. And I remember as soon as I walked on the stage, and Pastor Jeff hadn't warned them that I was coming, I remember the whole place stood to their feet, and I felt what it felt like to be a part of a family who will walk with you through any journey in life, a family that will love you even when you've done nothing for them. All I've done is taken from them, and they are welcoming me, and they're standing to their feet, rejoicing with me.
Jason worked hard at his rehab until by summertime his speech was getting clear. And despite his doctor's prediction, he was starting to sing again. But he knew he didn't make that progress on his own, and he wanted to give something back.
There's a song I wrote. I had actually written it, most of it I wrote before I got cancer. I didn't know why I wrote it, who I wrote it for. But I realize now, like, it's almost become my anthem. And I told Pastor Jeff, I'd like to share my song with my church family. After many painful surgeries, the cancer came back. Had to do more surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. They told me you might not sing again. You might not even speak again. But I'm here today. I'm standing, I'm walking, I'm jumping. And now I get to sing and speak about the goodness of God. You are greater than these walls I'm circling. You are stronger than this army that I see. You are bigger, oh, than the mountains that I face. And I would choose to only praise you.
A few days later, the song was posted on Facebook, so people who missed the service live could see it. But they weren't the only ones.
All of a sudden, after 2 days, it's got 200,000 views. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Wow, like, people are being blessed by it. A week later, it hits 1 million views. And we're kind of just this feeling of like, wait, what's happening? All of a sudden, we have people from Korea who fly to California to visit our church to see what is happening here. All of a sudden, I got people in Sweden and Australia and the UK who are messaging us and saying, hey, I have tongue cancer too. Other people saying, I stopped painting because of my illness. I stopped dancing because of my disease. I stopped singing because the first time I heard myself sing in the shower, I broke down crying because of the tongue cancer. But when I saw your story, I decided I want my own comeback story.
Since then, These Walls has been seen by over 6 million people around the world. It's been released on CD and iTunes. It's been produced as a music video. It's being sung in over 25 languages in 50 different countries each week. And its influence continues to spread.
If I could go back in time and not go through cancer, I would do that. I think there's this dangerous thing when we make people feel that the pain you've gone through, you have to pretend like it was okay. It's okay what your dad did to you. It's okay that you went through a divorce, because look at you now. You're stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Sometimes what doesn't kill you just makes you want to kill yourself. That was me. So I don't like the false narrative that everything, you have to look back at your life and be like, oh, it's okay, because it wasn't okay. It was bad. It was dark. But that's That's what Resurrection Sunday is. What happened to Jesus was not okay. Him being nailed to a cross, being tortured, was not okay. But Resurrection Sunday is about Jesus taking the things in your life that are not okay. They represent death and darkness and despair and hopelessness, and him saying, watch the ultimate comeback. I can redeem it. I can bring what was dead back to life. And now I look back and I see what a comeback. Like, he did it, and he gets all the glory, and the only thing I can do is never give up.
This is my song. This is my dare to worship you, even as these walls are standing there.
I want to thank Jason and Allie for just opening their story up to us. We as a family of faith have been part of that story. There's so much of what Jason shared with us is so true. First of all, there is no comeback without setbacks. But we don't glorify setbacks. You don't have to look for setbacks. Setbacks happen in life because life is tough. And where do they come from? Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes other people's mistakes. We live in a broken world. I can't tell you. See, sometimes you and I try to figure out, why did this happen? The question is not why did it happen, it's what can God do now? How can God redeem it? Because that's his promise. In fact, there's a verse I put in your notes, Romans 8, verse 28. And Paul writes, we know, not we feel, we know that in everything God works. It's not things are working out. God works for the good of those who love him. They are the people he called because that was his what? Hey, God has a plan. Even when bad stuff happens in your life and my life, even when hurtful things happen, even when cancer happens, even things happen to us that were not part of his plan, but he's got a plan. And the Bible says he can synergize them. That means he can work together even poisons for our good. And I want to show you one of the ways, I can't tell you all the good that will happen, but I'll tell you this. There's a third comeback principle in the Easter story, in Jason's story, and I want you to write it in your notes. Here's a third principle. Easter comebacks, Jesus and ours, are how God is seen. I want you to write the word seen. God is seen in comebacks. In fact, let me just tell you, this whole story Jesus shares, saying now's the time, and unless a grain of wheat, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it'll bring forth much fruit. He's talking about himself and us. But the reason he even said that was because there were some spiritual outsiders, these Greeks who had come to Jerusalem because they were just hungry for more, hungry for God, and they couldn't find God in all the paths they had pursued. And so they come to Jerusalem and they hear about Jesus and they tell Philip, one of Jesus' disciples who has a Greek name, maybe he'll put a word. They said, "Sir, we want to see Jesus." So Philip grabs Andrew and they go to Jesus and say, "There's these Greek seekers that would like to see you." And Jesus doesn't say anything about that. We don't know if they actually were brought. I think they probably were. We don't know that. But in response to that statement, they want to see you, Jesus said what we just read. And here's why. It's as if he said, if you want to see me, watch the plan of God in my life. Watch the mission of God that I've accepted. And watch the miracle of comeback in my life. And when you see me die and come back, you will see God. Because God is in the miracle of comebacks. One of the things in Jason's story that still just blows me away, and I've looked at so many of the people that have written him and sent videos. Those little video clips were from people. The girl who had tongue cancer and tried to sing in the shower, and she heard the lisp because she couldn't speak in the same way and broke down weeping until she saw Jason's video. And so for the first time since her tongue cancer, she sang in her church. She sang that song, and that was a video of her singing. And people began to play the piano that stopped playing, and people began to dance. Because let me tell you something about comebacks. See, comebacks show the power of God. And you see, well, that was Jesus. No, I need to see Jesus in somebody else. And when you see it, comebacks are contagious. I got a question. How many want to come back in your life? You want to come back in your life? Because God is seen in comebacks. Now, I put in your notes so you don't have to write it down. I gave you 3 ways that comebacks happen in our life. The first is to admit we need one. For some of us, we just have to say, God, I need to come back with you, with your plan, with your purpose in my marriage, in my family, in my finances. I need to come back it starts with admitting I need one. The second is to believe that what Jesus did, when he suffered, when he died, when he rose again, the whole story of Easter was about us. It was God's comeback plan for us. That's why there's an Easter. It's about us. And I've got to believe that. I've got to trust that God is the initiator of my comebacks. And then the third is I need to choose to follow Jesus. It's not just about making a decision. It's about becoming a disciple. A disciple means follower, a student of Jesus. That everything in my life changes. When I surrender my life to him, my life is no longer mine. I've died with him, and now I'm alive in him. And I live ways I've never lived before. And that's what Easter is all about. That the worst things in my life are not the last things in my life. Because Jesus came back, I can come back. In fact, I want you to say that out loud with me. We'll put it on the screens for you. And I want everyone together with your voice. I want you all to say this out loud with me. The worst thing in my life is not the last thing in my life. Because Jesus came back, I can too. I want you to close your eyes just for a moment. Father, I thank you for Easter. The events that we have talked about are all about your planned comeback for us. And I pray that not a single man or woman or student or single or senior would drive off this campus without having experienced the comeback you have for them in every area of life. I'm going to ask you to do, heads are bowed, eyes are closed just for a moment. And in our overflow rooms, this isn't more spiritual, it just shuts out distractions. And I want to ask you something today. I'm not going to embarrass you. I'm not going to ask you to step out in front of somebody. But I do want to ask for a response because faith is always an action. And if you need a comeback in some area of your life, you need a spiritual comeback with God, you need a relational comeback, you need a physical comeback, you need there's just an area of your life that you need the miraculous comeback of God. I want you as an act of faith and surrender just to stand to your feet because I want to pray with you. All over this room, in all of the overflow rooms, as an act of just admitting, God, I need to come back in my life. I need to come back with you. I need to come back in my relationships. I need to come back in my body. And I want us to pray together. God, you see the hundreds in this room and in the overflow rooms. Healing begins, hope begins when we just say help. And by standing, we say help. And I thank you that as we surrender, Lord, the promise and the dream and the goals, we just let it go because we can't make it happen. We have tried. That when we surrender it, you do something with it that only you can do. That the miracle of resurrection is your miracle, not only for Jesus, you showed it in Jesus because you want to show it in us. And I pray for each one standing that, Lord, in the same way they stood up, that there will be a voice from heaven that says, rise. And they will experience resurrection power. Forgive us our sins, our failures, and may we follow you to the amazing life you have for us. And I pray your blessing and favor on each standing person in Jesus' name.